Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to ROM Storytime. And as you can see, I brought a new friend with me. So everybody, this is Sarabeth. Sarabeth, this is our ROM Storytime friends. And would you like to introduce yourself and tell our Storytime friends who you are?
Sure. My name is Sarabeth Holden. I live in Toronto. I'm the current president of the Toronto Inuit Association. I am a mom. I have 2 little boys. I also have a dog, Oslo. I don't know what else you want to know about me. Oh, I should mention I'm an author. I'm not reading my book today. My book is coming out in September. It's called Please Don't Change My Diaper. But today I am going to read A Promise is a Promise by Michael Kusugak with Robert Munsch.
Yay! And I will show our Storytime friends what that book looks like. And then I will come back to you. And Sarabeth, I don't know if our Storytime friends know that this past Sunday was a really special day. And okay, people probably know Father's Day, yay dads, go dads. You know, a lot of people celebrated that. More people may know that it was the summer solstice. So it was the longest day of the year and the official start of summer. But it was also National Indigenous Peoples Day, and that is why I am really, really excited about this week. So as a teacher at the museum, I'm always really happy when I get to work with the Indigenous Knowledge Resource teachers at the ROM, and also when special friends from other Indigenous communities come in to share their knowledge, like you're doing with us today, Sarabeth, and I'm so happy about that. So this is true all year round, but this week especially is why I am so happy to have you here, because it's the perfect time for us to turn the Storytime mic over to somebody else. And all of my Storytime friends, you were in for such a treat this week. So in just a second, we will switch over to A Promise is a Promise, and you'll get to hear Sarabeth read this amazing story. Before we do that, Sarabeth, is there anything else you want to say before we start the story?
I'm really happy to be reading this story. As you mentioned, Sunday was National Indigenous Peoples Day. This year, the celebrations were a little bit different, online, obviously. And so I had read my book with an organization called the Inuit Futures. And it was a collective of people from across the country sharing stories and knowledge with the internet, with you guys. I should also mention that I am on the Indigenous Advisory Circle at the ROM, which is how I am involved with ROM on a regular basis. I work with a really great group of people, and it's diverse Indigenous people from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit from across the country who live here in Toronto, who work with ROM and all of the great programming that happens.
Yay. All right, so Storytime friends, sit back. You are in for a treat and, you know, a little bit of chill for this really, really hot week that we've had. So enjoy A Promise is a Promise. Hey, everybody. Sorry to interrupt. It is Sarah from the future with an important message for you. Now, unfortunately, after the 2020 school year ends, we can't keep the read aloud portion of the Storytime in the Storytime broadcast, but don't worry, I've got something special for you. Now, in the meantime, we do encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. You can sign it out of your library. Get your grown-ups help to share your thoughts with us at ROM Toronto, #ROM@home, because we would love to hear what you think of this book. But in the meantime, here is Sarah's super fast Storytime summary. Okay, so there's this girl named Alashwa who lives in Nunavut, and when it turns nice in spring, she's like, hey, I'm gonna go fishing in the cracks in the sea ice. And her mom's all, nah, go to the lake. The Kalapaluit live under the sea ice and grab kids who aren't with their parents. And Alashwa promises, but then she goes to the ice anyway and says, I don't believe Mom, I think Kalapaluit are like the Tooth Fairy, and calls out a bunch of stuff like, Kalapaluit stink! And when nothing happens, she starts fishing and catches all these fish and is all, I'm the best fisherman in the world! And then this creepy voice says, but not the smartest. And the Kalapaluit are there, and they're all, have you seen a rude kid that said all this stuff about us? And Alash was like, no, and besides, I think you're great, and you can do anything you want. And they're all, great, we want to catch you. And they drag Alashwa under the ocean. And Alashwa was like, no, let me go, I'll bring you my brothers and sisters, I promise. And they're all, a promise is a promise, and throw her out of the sea. So she runs home and collapses in a frozen heap in her yard. And her dad finds her and brings her in. And her parents put her to bed and give her hot tea. And she tells them what happened. And they're all like, not smart. A promise is a promise. But then they come up with a plan. And they tell their kids, when Mom starts dancing, go with Alashwa to the cracks in the ice. So Mom goes to the back door and yells, "Hey, Kalapalui, come here." And they do. And Mom and Dad are like, "Can we have our kids back?" And the Kalapalui are like, "Nope." And the parents go, "Oh well, come in when we say goodbye." So Mom gives the kids some bread, and the Kalapalui are like, "We want some too." And then Mom gives them candy, and the Kalapalui are like, "We want some too." And then the Mom and the Dad start dancing, and the Kalapalui are like, "We want to dance too." And while everyone's dancing, all the kids and Alashwa sneak down to the sea ice. And Alashwa's like, "Hey, Kalapalui, I brought everyone, but you're not here. Well." And then eventually, the Kalapalui come rushing down, being all like, "No, wait, we're here now, give us the kids." But Alashwa's like, "Nope, a promise is a promise." And the Kalapalui have this tantrum and dive back into the ocean and close up the cracks. And the parents are all, "We're gonna fish here as a family now, because the Kalapalui promised never to catch the kids with their parents, and a promise is a promise." And they all did, except for Alashwa, who couldn't get close to the ice anymore without hearing the Kalapalui singing for her to come and join them. And that was A Promise is a Promise. Sarabeth, that was amazing.
Thank you.
That was so much fun. And Sarabeth and I were actually talking a little bit about this last night, about how this is a really neat book because it connects to a few different places in the museum. So I'm going to show our friends one thing that we talked about. I'm going to scoot myself over so that I can still see. So this is a picture of the polar bear up on the second floor in the Biodiversity Gallery. And one of the things that I really liked about this one is that the polar bear actually has to go near cracks in the ice. So you can see that the polar bear is standing on ice and there's some cracks, and then if you can see what's coming out from the ice, it is the head of a seal. So the polar bears actually have to wait at the ice, because if you put a polar bear and a seal in the water together and you race them, who is going to win? The seal, every time. So the polar bear will wait until the seal comes up to breathe and then grab them. So the polar bear is something that actually wants cracks in the ice. And then, this is the other thing that we really wanted to show you, friends. This is a pair of leggings that are made out of caribou hide. So you can kind of see on the bottom there's some fur, and there's some more fur on the inside. And I think, Sarabeth, one of the things that I said to you is that these actually remind me a lot of the snow pants that I had to wear when I was little. And do you have anything that you want to add about the leggings?
Yeah. I really like these leggings, and I thought that they were perfect for today because they're from the Qevalak region, which is where Michael Kusugak is from. So they're something that Alashwa would likely have worn. So every region where Inuit live, there's a distinct style of clothing. And so traditionally, clothing was always made with materials that were available. So caribou hide are a perfect example of that. Kami, which are the boots that Inuit traditionally wore, are usually made out of sealskin. And Inuit seamstresses were very talented and really knew how to treat the different materials that they were using and sew in different ways so that they could, for example, make waterproof boots. Because if you think about in the springtime, whenever the snow is melting, and if you imagine, I'm sure you always imagine in the Arctic, there's all sorts of ice and snow, but as it melts, all that water pools, and you didn't have sewer grates like we do here in the city. So whenever you stepped in a puddle, you had to make sure that your feet stayed dry because it was still cold and you don't want to get cold feet.
Absolutely. All right, so friends, you know what to do. If you have any questions about the story that we read or about how it connects to either of these two galleries, either the Arctic display up on the second floor or the Inuit collection in the First Peoples Gallery, or if there's anything else that you want to ask Sarabeth, because it is really, really awesome to have her here today, you can start putting that in the chat. And while you are putting that in the chat, let's check out the creativity challenge for this week. In A Promise is a Promise, Alashwa learned an important lesson about going too close to the cracks in the ice. For as long as people have been in the world, stories have always been an important way for us to learn how to live safely in the world around us, especially when we're little. Stories like this are still important today. Alashwa lives in modern-day Nunavut with a skidoo in her front yard, but learning not to go near cracks in the ice over deep water is still an important lesson to learn for the place where she lives. Throughout your life, you've probably also learned an important lesson about living where you are. Lessons like be respectful and leave wild animals, like bees or raccoons, alone to do their own thing, or to put on sunscreen if you're going to be outside in the summer, or to bundle up if you're going out in the winter, or to pay attention to traffic signals and look both ways before you cross the street. For our creativity challenge this week, you're going to think of one important lesson you learned about how to live safely in your world, and create a spooky story to pass that lesson on to other kids. Think of an important lesson you want to pass on. Write a story that teaches other people that lesson. If you want to get really creative, design a creepy creature that would be very happy if you forgot that lesson, and figure out a way for the main character of your story to outsmart it. Find a creative way to tell your story. You could read it, draw a comic, act it out with a friend, create a shadow play, whatever feels right to you. Share your stories with us at ROM Toronto, #ROM@home. All right, so that is our creativity challenge this week, to tell your own story that teaches a really important lesson. And we see your awesome questions coming in, and just before we get to those, I just want to shout out. So our story this week and our creativity challenge this week is all about how important stories are. And one of the other really cool things about having Sarabeth here is Sarabeth is a storyteller. So this is the cover of Sarabeth's book. And Sarabeth, I know you already talked about it a little bit, but do you want to tell our friends who are watching what your book is about before we head on to their awesome questions?
Sure. Please Don't Change My Diaper is about a little kid who thinks that the world is falling apart because he needs his diaper changed. So the story goes through the process. He really doesn't want to get his diaper changed. He really thinks that the world is falling apart. The tides are no longer rising. It's the end of the world. In the end, spoiler alert, the world keeps on turning. I think that this is really relevant for today, especially as we've spent the last few months the way that we have, where it sometimes it does seem like the world is falling apart, but the most important thing is to be there for your loved ones, your friends, your family members, to give them comfort, because the most important thing is having those people around you to provide that.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for sharing that, Sarabeth. Okay, there are so many really awesome questions, so let's just start from the top. So Skits wants to know if there are any other creatures that teach lessons about surviving in the Arctic.
Absolutely. Every region, every community, maybe even down to every family, have their own stories that they would tell. So Inuktitut is traditionally an oral language, and so stories were always passed down. So as you pass from generation to generation, from person to person, there are always going to be slight variations. So someone would tell the story a little bit differently. Some of my favorites are about the Tonglait. So Tonglait are monsters that live on the land, and they're told the story. Children are told stories in different ways, often, so that children wouldn't wander off because the Tonglait will come and eat them. There are teeny tiny mushrooms in the region of Nunavut where I'm from, and I always grew up knowing these teeny tiny mushrooms that look like cups as Tonglait cups. So those are the cups that Tonglait would use to drink. Kalupaluit have variations across the territory. I'm sure Sedna is a more commonly known story, and that's about the ocean as well. So there's a lot of stories around the Arctic Ocean because it is so cold, and if you were to fall in, then hypothermia sets in pretty quickly.
So we have that picture of Sedna up there. Sedna and a bear. All right. I like that the first creatures that you were talking about, the Dolnite?
Yes, so might.
So, my grandmother is Scottish, and so we grew up with stories about how you wanted to keep an eye out for rings of mushrooms because those were fairy rings, and if you stepped in those, then the fairies would take you away, which was a really good way of learning. Just don't wander around the woods at night, it's a bad idea.
And that makes a lot of sense. I've never been to Scotland, but I hear in the Highlands the earth is very much the same. There's a lot of heather. It's very similar. That kind of tundra looking thing. I think that there are a lot more trees in Scotland, but it's very similar.
And when you get up to the Highlands, because the winds can come through, trees don't tend to do as well. So a lot of the Highlands, there's actually no trees. It's just tundra. And I guess moors. All right. Okay, so this is an interesting one. I'm going to put the leggings back on the screen because Paige would like to know what the big bulges in the middle of the leggings are for.
Paige, I wish I could tell you. I didn't grow up with this style of legging because I'm from a different region. I would assume that they're about style. We talked about talented seamstresses creating all of this beautiful clothing, and there's beautiful clothing that you can really see the variations. There's beading, there's ways of stitching to really give a specific style. My assumption would be that it's for style. There could be a functional use to them as well. I'll look into it. I'll ask around.
I always wonder, when I was putting on my snow pants, I used to like to wear dresses, and it was really hard to like stuff all the dress into the snow pants. I wonder if that might be part of it too.
Could be.
Okay, let's see. Elise would like to know which materials or skins would be warmer for boots or clothing. So we've mentioned caribou and seal. Are they about equal?
Caribou has a much thicker fur. So that is used for parkas and things. I remember one spring I went up north and we were out skidooing, and someone lent me their caribou skin parka. It is the warmest thing I have ever worn. It really depends on the region. So in our region, caribou is available. Polar bears less so, but everyone traditionally less so, but they've kind of come back. So you see polar bears more often. I have a picture of my mom when she was 4, and she had the cutest polar bear leggings. I'm not even sure what they were. They were so tiny, and she doesn't remember either, but they were very warm. So when you picture like a thicker fur, that would provide a lot more warmth, where the seal skin really provides that waterproofness.
Amazing. Okay. Holly would like to know if there are any depictions in the oral stories about what the Kalapluit looked like, or if it's just the artist's idea in the book.
It's absolutely the artist's idea. I would imagine that the artist worked with Michael Kusugak to develop a depiction that she wanted to create. But the storyteller would really drive that. What's really scary? Do they have teeth? Do they have long fingers? How do they move? What are their eyes like? What do they sound like?
I really love that the in the book, the illustrations, they have like crabs and fish in their hair, and then they have skulls in their loon parkas, which is really cool and kind of creepy.
And those would have been of the children that they had caught previously.
This is creepy monsters and stories are the best when you're little, and I find it's usually the grown-ups who are the most scared, and the kids are just like, yeah, bring it on. I watched some very creepy things when I was little that were the best.
Scary stories are really great. You tell lots of scary stories. One of my favorites when I was little was about the Northern Lights. Whenever they were out, you were told not to whistle at them. And if you whistled at them, then they would come down, they would chop your head off and play soccer with it.
Elise is wondering again about the song of the Kalapluit, if there's a traditional tune for it, or is it different for every person who tells the story?
Different for everyone who tells the story. I ended up singing this song over and over after a few times, but everyone has their own tune.
All right. Yeah, Skits was wondering if the bulges in the leggings would be for tucking pants into, like we were talking about.
Okay.
Krista wants to know if there's video of you reading the story about the diaper and the baby.
I'm not sure if it was recorded. If you follow me on Facebook, then I will be providing updates and everything. My book is only coming out September 1st. And if things keep progressing the way that they're going, then my book launch will be on September 12th. So I'll share all the details about that, and I can't wait to welcome all of you.
And friends, so down at, this side, the bottom of the screen, there's ROM.ON.CA/storytime. So every week, about a day or two after we do our broadcast, the page about this week's storytime will go up, and there is a link on that page to Sarabeth's book if you want to learn more about it. All right. Jeanette wants to know, how do urban Inuk families stay in touch with their culture?
It really varies. The Toronto Inuit Association works to help people get in touch with their culture, especially Inuit who were born and raised in the South. There are many Inuit who were born and raised in the South for a variety of different reasons. So through the Toronto Inuit Association, we offer different programming, beading, sewing. We had someone who made palawak before everything was locked down. Palawak is bannock. It's a bread that was introduced by the Scottish, Sarah. Their culture. It's really delicious. I made it a couple weeks ago with my son, and 3 cups of flour ended up all over my kitchen. It was quite the adventure. So for me, I speak with my mom every day. I ask her questions all the time. Not everyone has that. So we are really trying to create a community in Toronto so that people can, openly ask questions and become familiar with things that they just haven't had the opportunity to learn. And I think, there's always opportunity to learn. So just living that way and recognizing that there are really great things out there that we haven't even encountered yet.
And I would just like to point out for our friends in chat the earrings that Sarabeth is wearing. Sarabeth, do you want to talk about those?
There are so many beautiful jewelry makers who are Inuit. My cousin Becky made these ones. They're a combination of sealskin, leather, and feather. And there are so many beautiful makers. So these are my favorites. I love to wear them. And I thought that I would represent a little bit of Inuit culture today along with my dinosaur sweater.
Yes,
which is
dinosaur sweater.
Appropriate for this audience, especially for the ROM.
And Skits is saying, you mentioned stories changing as they're told, which means there can be a lot of different versions of the same story. And they'd like to know if, Sarabeth, you know any other versions of this story?
I've heard a variety of different stories about Kalupalui. I was very young when I heard these ones specifically, and I don't hear them on a regular basis since I live in Toronto. I do remember when I was 7 during springtime, going and encountering a big crack in the ice and just being absolutely terrified. And someone had to pick me up and take me over that because I was so scared. So I wouldn't be able to retell that story just because I wasn't told that regularly. I went back and forth between New Brunswick and Nunavut. And, I was told them. I just don't remember them.
All right. Yeah, Paige is saying that very thankful for the urban Inuit community with a heart. Yeah.
Paige is a program coordinator at the Toronto Inuit Association. So she helps to make all of this stuff happen, including all of our online programming that's usually called Titokomabit, where people can gather and participate in online programming.
That's amazing. All right, I'm going to change our screen a little bit. So it looks like our chat is slowing down, but friends, if you have questions that come up later and you're like, oh, I wish I'd asked that question, that side. At ROM Toronto, #ROM at home. You can always send us those questions on social media, and I am able to be in contact with Sarabeth, so we can always get answers for you later if they come up as well. So it looks like we are slowing down, and I was just wondering if before we go, Sarabeth, you gave me a bit of a language lesson last night on the creatures in our story today. I was wondering if you could help our friends who are watching to say the name of them as well.
So Sarah, as she mentioned, is Scottish, and so she has that guttural muscle really in tune, and she grew up hearing that. So the way that it was explained to me is those muscles that you use to clear your throat, if you've got something lodged in there, it's those muscles that you're using for the Krykorka. So Krykorka is a sound that we don't have in English. the biggest trip that I always had, the trip up that I had when I was learning the difference between my ki and my k, because when one is represented by k, one is represented by q. So the k is something that we use every day in English. The q isn't necessarily. So kikitan, which means many islands, is ki kikten. So you get the ki and the ki there. So if you practice your and then go ki, so it's a little bit softer. It's not quite as hard as when you're clearing your throat. It's ki, ku, ka. So those are the three different vowel sounds that are associated with the cues. So ka, lu, pa, luit. And so kalupuluit is many of these creatures. And so with Inuktitut, there's always a word for one, and then another word for two, and then three. So kalupalok, kalupali, kalupalo, kalupaluit. So for example, maybe you've heard of the community Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut. Iqaluk is one fish, Iqalu is two, Iqaluit is many fish. So same idea with that, and you also get the Qikuqa in there.
Oh, wow. And Holly is now asking if there's anywhere in Toronto where we can take Inuit language lessons.
At the moment, there isn't. There are some online resources. The ones that I'm familiar with are out of Nunavut. Pikovik, for example. There's also an online glossary resource called Tusalanga. And I can provide that information to Sarah, and she can post those links for you.
Awesome. I will add that to the Storytime page when it goes up. And Elise is saying thank you for the pronunciation lesson.
Awesome.
All right. So it looks like our chat is winding up. So I want to say thank you so much, Sarabeth, for joining us today. That was amazing, and I was so happy to have you here. It's so much fun having a co-host. And I hope you enjoyed meeting all our chat friends too.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll mention, just because we went through the pronunciation guide, Tuyanamik is how we say thank you in the dialect where I'm from, which is Panoktok on Baffin Island. So that also has the Tuyanamik. Thank you.
Oh, yay. All right. And thank you, Storytime friends, for joining us for this amazing story today. And I'm going to say, as always, thank you for joining us. Take care of each other. Keep reading. And I will see you next Tuesday. Goodbye, everybody.